It started like any other Tuesday. The sky above 5th and Knox was a dull gray, the kind of color that made the glass buildings look like tombstones. I stepped out of my ride in a plain charcoal coat. No flash, no logos, just fabric and intent. I walked through the heavy revolving doors of Banksphere's downtown branch with my usual quiet stride. Nothing to prove, nothing to announce. My shoes didn't echo like the others. I didn't like making noise. I came here for a simple task: transfer a modest $100 from my main account into a separate ledger I used to track some low-interest community donations. It wasn't a big deal, but it was how I kept certain projects clean. The bank lobby was a white cathedral of capitalism. Marble floors, vaulted glass ceilings, silver fixtures that gleamed like surgical instruments. And right in the center of it, like a bad taste you couldn't spit out, stood Bryn, my sister-in-law, decked in head-to-toe designer. Balmain, I think, or whatever overpriced snake skin was trending this month, and surrounded by two of her overdressed clones. I clocked her too late. She spotted me before I could duck behind the self-service kiosk. Her voice rose above the soft jazz playing from the lobby speakers, coated in that honeyed cruelty only people born with too much money and not enough substance could perfect. Do you really need the 100 that bad, Cashin? The sound of her words was sharp, but the echo of the laughter was worse. It rolled out in waves. Her little posse of heiress friends chuckled behind their manicured hands. Even the guard at the door cracked a smile. One of the tellers laughed a little too hard, glancing at me like I was something funny they'd found under a shoe. Is that your rent money, Cashin? Bryn added with a smirk. Like a final nail she didn't even have to hammer. Just press in. I stood still, felt the blood in my cheeks threaten to rise, but pushed it down. I learned long ago that silence makes people uncomfortable. I just met her eyes. No smile. No reply. Then I walked to the counter. Calm. Collected. The banker was a young woman, 25 maybe, polished, lips painted with intention but hands twitching slightly like she wasn't sure if she was dealing with a customer or a joke. I pulled out my ID and slid it across the counter without flinching. I'd like to make a withdrawal, I said clearly, leveling my voice so every syllable landed with weight. She hesitated, still halfway smiling from Bryn's performance. Of course, sir. The amount. A large one, I said. Something in my tone must have caught her. She blinked, then nodded. Okay. I can help with that. The bank went still for a moment, as if the air had been shifted. Bryn's expression twitched, just slightly. She tilted her head and whispered something to one of her friends. I could see the confusion starting to thread across her smug face like a crack spreading across polished porcelain. I stepped slightly to the side so the monitor shielded my next words. I gave the banker my account number. She started typing, her polished nails clacking softly against the keyboard. I watched her expression change from mechanical to confused to vaguely startled. Her eyes flicked up at me, then back to the screen. I'm sorry, she said. One moment. She stood and walked over to her manager, middle-aged, gray suit, thinning hair, the kind of man who usually looked bored and slightly above everything. She whispered to him, and he came back with her, his eyes scanning me like he'd just noticed I existed. Sir, he said, voice suddenly cautious. Can I ask you to verify your authorization code? I nodded and spoke it calmly, then placed my thumb against the scanner when prompted. The screen beeped once, then turned green. The manager stared at the numbers on the screen like he'd just seen a ghost. Or a gold mine. Probably both. He looked at me again, this time without the detached condescension most bankers wear like perfume. This time, he looked at me like a man realizing he might have made a mistake a long time ago. And it had just walked through his lobby. The teller came back to her seat and printed something slowly, carefully. A balance sheet. Her hands trembled slightly now. She passed it to me as if she were handling a holy relic. I didn't look down. Instead, I turned around. Bryn was still watching, but the laughter had died in her throat. Her eyes darted between me and the sheet in my hand. Her smirk had faded, replaced by something else, confusion first, then hesitation, then fear dressed up as curiosity. I took a step closer. Just one. Still laughing. I asked, calm as glass. She didn't respond. Her throat moved like she wanted to swallow something but couldn't. Her friends were suddenly quiet too, shifting their weight from one foot to another, eyes no longer wide with judgment but with caution. I didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. I just folded the slip neatly, tucked it in my coat pocket, and turned back to the banker. Thank you, I said, softly. That will be all. As I walked away, the silence in the room pressed around me like gravity. I didn't raise my voice, didn't point fingers, didn't boast. But something had shifted. Not just in that room. In the story they told themselves about me. The caricature they used to ridicule had walked into their cathedral of status and quietly torn the veil away. Because power doesn't knock. It enters. And when it does, it doesn't need to explain a damn thing. They thought I was poor because I never bragged. That was their first mistake. I've learned over time that people confuse humility with lack. They think silence is the absence of substance, and restraint is a symptom of insufficiency. I let them believe that, because I never cared to correct them. Until now. That $100 I moved in the bank wasn't survival money. It wasn't even important. It was a bookkeeping entry, just one of hundreds I made each quarter to keep certain philanthropic accounts balanced. But Bryn saw me transfer it and assumed it was all I had. Because that's what people like her do, measure others by how loudly they spend. Bryn had always treated me like the stray Rowan brought home. The pity project with decent cheekbones and good posture. She never could pronounce the name of my fund correctly, even after being corrected 5 times. Miles Ventures, right? She used to say, mock sincere, dragging out the word ventures like it was a bad punchline. To her, I was invisible in the way quiet men with invisible income tend to be in rooms that run on noise and flash. That's fine. That's what I counted on. That day in the bank, I didn't flinch when she laughed. I didn't bite when she mocked me. I didn't even bother to look at the women who cackled beside her like a Greek chorus of shallow cruelty. I let her perform. I let the snickering run its course. Because while Bryn thought she was setting a stage for mockery, she was unknowingly building the theater for her own humiliation. I remember every dinner party where she made me the butt of a joke. Cashin, you're so quiet. I forgot you were even here. Or, oh, you still doing that freelancing thing. She'd smile wide after each jab, her teeth always just a bit too perfect, her voice just a bit too loud. And Rowan, bless her, would try to laugh it off, smooth it over, squeeze my hand under the table like I needed comfort instead of room. But that bank lobby was different. The air shifted when I said I wanted to make a large withdrawal. Not because I said it loudly, not because I caused a scene, but because something about the way I said it made people realize they'd been looking at me through the wrong lens. When I turned back to Bryn and asked if she was still laughing, I wasn't asking for a response. I already had it. Her silence said more than her mockery ever could. I left the bank with no celebration, just a folded receipt in my coat pocket and a strange, still kind of satisfaction pooling in my chest. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. But it was the moment I stopped pretending that their opinions mattered, that their rooms defined my worth, that their surnames somehow legitimized what I had built quietly over the years. You see, Rowan's family had always been obsessed with presentation. Even their tragedies were curated. Her mother once delayed announcing her brother's divorce for 3 weeks so it wouldn't overshadow the spring charity gala. That's the kind of people they were. Everything was about appearances, how it looked, how it sounded, how it would be remembered. And I never fit their mold. I met Rowan in a coffee shop, not a gala. She was wearing a sweatshirt with paint on the cuffs and had 3 different shades of highlighter in her law textbook. We clicked because we both understood ambition without needing to speak it. But the Rowan I married slowly bent back toward the gravity of her upbringing, dinner parties with layered name cards, weekends in homes that weren't really homes, and friends like Bryn, whose love came in the form of condescension. For years, I played along. I let them underestimate me. I wore the off-brand shoes to their family brunches. I drove the same car. I kept my phone face down, not because I was hiding anything, but because I had nothing to prove. I built my world in silence while they decorated theirs with empty echoes. Bryn always made it clear she didn't think I belonged. Once, at a Christmas dinner, she laughed and said, "Rowan, you could have at least married someone with a LinkedIn profile that doesn't scream startup failure." I smiled, sipped my wine, and let it go. She thought success wore cologne and carried a business card. But real power? It doesn't ask for a table. It owns the building. The $100 wasn't about the money. It was a thread, a signal, a symbol that triggered a series of events I'd quietly orchestrated for months. I chose that bank, that branch, and that time. I didn't know Bryn would be there, but it didn't matter. Someone like her was always somewhere, watching, mocking, assuming. And when they assumed wrong, it was never a gentle correction. It was a collapse. What people like Bryn don't understand is that wealth has levels. There's the wealth you wear, the wealth you spend, and then there's the kind of wealth that doesn't need to be seen. The kind that moves through shell companies and trust funds, that files patents under aliases and controls assets across 6 countries through proxies. That's the kind I'd built. But I'd build it in a way they couldn't grasp because it didn't show up on social media or at auction house previews. That day in the bank was a fracture point, the first in a series of tiny, deliberate incisions I would make to the image they held of me. I didn't need to slash it down in one stroke. No, it was better to let it unravel. Slowly, elegantly, publicly. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't need to be shouted to change everything. It just needs to be revealed at the right moment. So I walked out of the bank. I didn't text Rowan. I didn't call anyone. I got into the same quiet car I'd driven for the last 6 years and sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, listening to nothing. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the app for Miles Equity Holdings. Not to check balances, just to remind myself what they never knew. The $100 was never the headline. It was the comma. And the sentence that followed? Well, they'd be reading it for years. Please verify the withdrawal amount, sir. The banker's voice trembled slightly, like she wasn't sure if this was a prank or a test. I kept my expression unreadable and repeated it slowly, each syllable landing like a stone on water. 1 billion. There was a stillness around us now. The kind of stillness that happens when people hear something so unexpected it scrambles their brain for a reaction. She blinked twice, clearly waiting for me to laugh, or correct myself, or lean in and say I meant 1 million, which would have still been insane in this setting. But I didn't blink. I didn't budge. 1 billion, I said again, calmly, like I was asking for a coffee refill. She stared at her screen for a beat too long before turning to her manager. I recognized the move, a subtle SOS built into the rhythm of customer service. He stepped forward, bald at the crown, wide-shouldered, well into his 50s, the kind of man who had probably dealt with a few fraud attempts and maybe a few eccentric wealthy types. But even he looked rattled when I handed over the account number and followed with the full string of access codes. He gave a short nod and tapped a few keys on the keyboard himself, his posture stiffening with every field he filled. Then came the scanner. Fingerprint authentication, he said quietly. I pressed my thumb to the pad. Green light. A chime. Then silence. And not the normal kind. The banker's chair stopped creaking. The hum of casual conversations across the branch dropped into a lull. The teller 2 seats away paused mid-sentence. The security guard stopped tapping his pen against his palm. It was as if the air itself froze. On the screen in front of the manager, a number stretched across the interface, more digits than the average civilian ever expects to see in one place. Commas like gates. Zeros like moons. A balance that didn't just speak, it roared. The manager exhaled slowly, his professionalism cracking around the edges like old wood. Mr. Miles, he said, almost reverently. It was the first time that day someone had said my name without a hint of mockery or disbelief. I'll need to confirm with compliance before we proceed, he added quickly, trying to find his bearings. I nodded once. Of course. As he turned away to make the call, I looked around the lobby again. Eyes were on me now, not curious, not mocking, but alert, suspicious, hungry. People weren't sure what they were looking at yet. Just that something seismic had shifted. And then Bryn saw the slip. It was in the banker's hand, barely visible. But it didn't take much. The printer had quietly spat out a pre-confirmation of the transaction, the kind they print when they're about to execute something massive. The number at the top was bold, unmistakable. She tilted her head, confusion pinching her brow. I watched the moment her eyes processed the number. The smirk she wore like jewelry faded, piece by piece, until her mouth was a flat, uncertain line. I didn't look away. She whispered something to one of her friends. The woman glanced at me, back at Bryn, then squinted toward the banker's screen. They were trying to piece together what was happening, like villagers watching a spaceship land. And then it hit her. It wasn't just the number. It was the name. Cashin Miles. Not Rowan's husband. Not the broke guy with a quiet job. Not +1, or freelancer, or couch investor. Founder. It said founder. On the screen. On the account. On the statement. There was no mention of Whitlock. No hint of family inheritance. No tether to the pedigree they believed made someone valuable. Just me. Cashin Miles. Solo. The silence grew heavier. Someone dropped a pin. A child murmured. I could hear the whir of the security camera as it adjusted angles, probably flagged by facial recognition or balance alert thresholds. The banker looked at me again, her hands now respectfully folded. Would you like a printed confirmation of the account title? She asked softly. I smiled, just enough to be polite. Yes, please. She printed it, slid it across the glass with both hands, like it was a document of great ceremonial value. I picked it up slowly. Read the top. Account holder, cash and miles. Title, founder, Verity Quantum Holdings LLC. Balance, $1,087,324,098.42. I folded it once and tucked it into my inner coat pocket. I turned then, deliberately, and met Bryn's eyes. She tried to recover, even in that moment. I watched her face tighten into something that wanted to be indifference, but her lips betrayed her. They trembled slightly. Her friends had gone quiet. The one in the green trench coat began tapping nervously on her phone. I took a few slow steps toward her, not close enough to be threatening, just enough that she had to acknowledge I was in front of her now. I remember what you said last Christmas, I said, my voice soft. Something about how you married up. That I must be grateful someone like Rowan gave me a shot. Bryn's mouth opened slightly. No sound came. I continued. It's strange, though, how someone so sure of their own worth never stopped to ask about mine. Her eyes flicked to the banker, to the security guard, then back to me. You don't have to worry, Bryn, I said. I won't make a scene. I turned and walked away, just as the compliance officer emerged from the side door. He barely glanced at me before motioning the branch manager into a corner conversation. I didn't care what they whispered about. Everything they needed to know was already confirmed. As I exited the bank, the air outside felt different. Crisp. Real. Like it had waited for me to breathe it properly for the first time in years. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to post or announce or grab anyone's attention. The bank had cameras. The staff would talk. Word would spread. Whispers would grow. And somewhere in that echo chamber of inherited arrogance and designer assumptions, the truth would bloom like wildfire. The beggar in the lobby was never begging. He was counting. They never asked where I disappeared to after the wedding. That was their second mistake. The first was thinking I had nowhere to go. After Rowan and I got married, there was a brief flash of attention on us, mostly because of her last name. Whitlock. The kind of name that opens doors just by being uttered in the right room. The kind of name that comes with catered brunches, golf course memberships, and weekend homes that sit empty for 9 months of the year. When people heard we'd tied the knot, they assumed I was another lucky outsider who married into the castle. Nobody asked where I came from. Nobody asked what I did. They assumed I was part of the wallpaper, a well-behaved ornament. I let them. At first, I showed up to the galas, the fundraisers, the polished chaos of their social world. I shook hands with hedge fund ghosts and listened to real estate wives talk about their yoga gurus while sipping wine they didn't know how to pronounce. And I smiled, because I knew something none of them did. I wasn't here to join them. I was here to leave them behind. 3 months after the wedding, I started pulling back. No drama. No grand exit. Just small things. Stopped RSVPing to charity events. Stopped tagging along to lunches with Rowan's friends. I told her I needed to focus. New project, I said. Nothing serious yet. She kissed my cheek and went back to planning someone's bridal shower. I left the city. Moved my work to a 3-bedroom flat I rented under a trust name on the edge of Millhaven. Quiet, nondescript, low-rise buildings with bad insulation but great privacy. That's where I built it. Verity Quantum. It started as a theory, a way to harness AI not for consumer fluff, but for predictive economic strategy. Not just tracking markets, but anticipating them. I found 2 partners, one in Singapore, the other in Berlin. Ghosts, really. Men like me who didn't care for recognition, just precision and control. We coded day and night. Mapped data lakes, ran simulations, found edges in the noise. We predicted shifts in oil pricing before OPEC announced. We knew when our. Together. That was before the laughter. Before the bank lobby. Before the blank looks and the exclusion. Before I realized I was never really a part of them, just a tool they used without crediting. I walked into the restaurant alone, dressed in a midnight black suit tailored to my frame but without a single flashy logo or sheen. I didn't want to be noticed immediately. I wanted to observe. The maitre d' looked up and smiled professionally. Reservation? No reservation, I said calmly. But I believe the Whitlock party is using the Windsor room. Yes, sir. He glanced down at the list. That's a private event. I'm aware. I held his gaze a moment longer, then slid my black card across the podium. The deposit for tonight's event came from this card. He looked at the card, blinked. I'd like to check on the dinner I paid for, I added, still smiling. His spine straightened like a soldier coming to attention. Of course, sir. Right this way. We moved through the corridors. Polished wood, hushed conversation, the kind of luxury that whispers instead of screams. As we neared the private room, the soft hum of chatter and clinking glasses floated out. Familiar laughter. The wine-fueled kind. I could already hear Bryn. I stopped just before the entrance. I'll go in alone. He nodded. As you wish. I stepped inside. The room wasn't large, but every inch gleamed. The Whitlocks were masters at spectacle. Long banquet table. Candles. Personalized place cards and looping calligraphy. And seated at the head, like a queen at a coronation, was Rowan's mother, Marjorie Whitlock. Bryn sat on her right, grinning, wrapped in pearls and self-importance. Rowan, on her left, in a silk dress the color of champagne. Not one of them noticed me at first. I took it in. Then the waiter appeared beside me, his tray lined with pink envelopes. He stopped, confused. I tilted my head. Is that for the family? Yes, sir. Final bill. Let me see it. He handed one over. The name on it was mine. Of course. I slipped it out and read the total. I didn't flinch. I knew the number before I walked in. Then I walked to the table. Conversation stalled. Eyes turned. Bryn's mouth froze in mid-laugh. Her wine glass paused just shy of her lips. Rowan blinked. Her mother stared at me as though I'd just crawled out of the earth. Cashin, Marjorie said. Cool. Controlled. Evening. I replied, just as calm. Beautiful venue. Can we help you? Bryn asked, voice sharp, defensive. I didn't look at her yet. I stepped beside Rowan and placed the pink envelope gently on her plate. You left this off the seating chart, I said softly. Rowan looked down at it, confused, then looked at me. That's the bill, I added. For tonight. You all forgot whose name was on the card. No one moved. No one spoke. Bryn's face turned a shade darker. You're making a scene, she muttered. I'm standing, I said. You all made the scene. I just paid for the lights. I let that hang in the air. Then finally, I looked at Bryn. Her face was cracking. Her lips trembled just slightly. I leaned in, just enough for only her to hear. Still laughing. She didn't answer. She stood suddenly too fast and nearly knocked over her chair. Everyone turned to her. But no one followed when she walked out. Not one person. Her silence was heavier than any insult she ever threw at me. Rowan's fingers hovered near the envelope. Why did you come? She asked. To remind you, I said. Remind all of you who's been carrying the weight while you danced. Marjorie cleared her throat. Cashin, this is not the place. No, Marjorie, I cut in gently. This is exactly the place. This is the table I wasn't invited to. The one I paid for. The one you keep setting without my name. I turned to Rowan one last time. Look around, Rowan. Every person here smiled in my face while erasing my name behind my back. I won't fight for a seat anymore. I own the building. You all just rent space. Then I walked out. No theatrics. No slammed doors. Just the quiet steps of a man who no longer needed their approval. As I reached the street, the air hit me like relief. Crisp. Clean. Real. Inside, they were still frozen in my absence. And that, more than anything, was the closure I didn't know I needed. The penthouse was quiet when I entered it for the last time. I didn't flip on the lights. I knew every creak in the floorboards, every beam of moonlight that slipped through the glass walls. This place had once felt like a dream, our first real home together, bought after the wedding, filled with designer touches Rowan picked and quiet comforts I added without much discussion. Now, it felt like a museum. Still, cold, hollow. It was past midnight. I knew she wouldn't be home until well after 2. Her calendar was always filled with networking cocktails, gallery showings, charity galas that raised money for causes she couldn't pronounce. That gave me time. I walked straight to the kitchen island. White marble, flawless, sterile. The same island where we used to drink coffee on Sundays. Where I once stood, arms around her waist, while she laughed at something meaningless. I used to think love lived in the small spaces, mugs left beside the sink, notes scribbled on napkins. But love, real love, doesn't ignore you at a dinner table. Doesn't erase your presence at family functions. Doesn't sit silently when you're being humiliated in a room you paid to light. And it sure as hell doesn't leave you off a birthday invitation when you funded the entire celebration. I set the box down gently. It wasn't large. Matte black. Heavy. Inside it was everything I hadn't said. First, my wedding band. Platinum, scuffed slightly on the edges from years of wear. I remembered the day I put it on. The vows we wrote ourselves. She cried when I read mine. I didn't. I meant every word too deeply to weep. Then the letter. I had rewritten it 8 times before settling on the version now folded neatly inside. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Just truth shaped like a blade, but sharpened by restraint. And finally, a manila envelope with her name written in my hand. Rowan Miles Whitlock. Inside it, the prenup amendment she signed during a quiet panic 3 years ago, back when Whitlock Interiors was 3 weeks from collapse and the bank was threatening a hostile takeover. I had bailed them out with quiet capital. In exchange, Rowan and I updated our legal agreements just in case. She'd skimmed it, distracted, trusted me, or maybe just didn't care. Clause 11. Addendum C. It granted me full legal ownership of her 40% stake in Whitlock Interiors if the marriage dissolved and I could prove professional neglect or public disparagement. She gave me both, on paper and in person. I didn't need to fight her for anything now. I already had it. Ownership. Leverage. Closure. I placed the ring on top of the folded letter. Centered everything in the box. Then I walked room by room, not out of sentiment, but to make sure I wasn't leaving anything that mattered. My old briefcase was still in the closet. I took it. A sweater I liked was buried beneath a pile of designer bags. I folded it and packed it too. One framed photo remained on my nightstand, us in Italy, smiling at something just off camera. Her hair was windblown, and I looked younger, still trying to believe love could soften the past. I left that photo, let her decide what to do with it. Back in the kitchen, I pulled out a no card from the drawer. Wrote one sentence in my cleanest handwriting. I didn't leave because of the insults. I left because you believed them. I slid it under the box lid, flush with the edge. No need for more. Then I walked out. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual, even though the numbers moved quickly. I watched my reflection in the polished steel of the doors. Not bitter. Not angry. Just done. I'd spent years trying to be enough for people who had no capacity to see what enough even looked like. You can't fill the expectations of those addicted to emptiness. I had tried, and I had paid for that effort in silence, in erasure, in dinners where I was treated like the staff. But no more. Outside, the city exhaled around me. Cabs glided past, distant sirens murmured, and streetlights buzzed faintly in their sockets. The world kept moving, unaware that a page had turned behind those penthouse windows. I took a cab across town to the apartment I'd signed for 3 weeks earlier, leased under my name. Not a trust, not an alias. Just cash-in. 2 bedrooms. Clean lines. A balcony that overlooked the water. It wasn't lavish, but it was mine. Mine in a way nothing shared with Rowan ever truly had been. I set my bag down, poured myself a drink, and sat in the quiet. The kind that doesn't scream loneliness, but offers peace. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. At exactly 4:06 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number, but I knew it was her. I let it ring once, then twice, before it stopped. Seconds later, a message came through. You left? Are you serious? Then another. What is this box? Then a photo of the contents. The ring. The letter. The prenup. Another message. You're being cruel. This is your family. And finally, we can talk. I didn't know you felt like this. I stared at the screen, then flipped the phone over. We'd had years to talk. I'd sat in 1,000 silences hoping she'd ask what I was building, why I seemed so far away, what I needed. But she never asked, because she never thought she had to. In her world, love was given to the loudest, the flashiest, the most convenient. I wasn't any of those things. I was steady, intentional, quiet, until I wasn't. I didn't reply. Some letters are meant to be read too late. Some goodbyes arrived not with slammed doors, but with paper and ink. The next day, headlines would ripple. Major stakeholder assumes control of Whitlock Interiors amid family split. Speculation would swirl, but I wouldn't give an interview. I wouldn't tell anyone my side, because the moment she opened that box, she knew. Not just what she lost, but who I had always been. Cashin. That's the name they whisper now. Not Rowan's husband. Not the quiet one. Not the broke-in-law who married up. Just Cashin. First name only, like an enigma people pretend to have always known. And every time I hear it floating behind closed doors, in boardrooms I no longer attend, on podcasts hosted by analysts scrambling to connect dots they never saw forming, I feel nothing. Not pride. Not revenge. Just clarity. Because the story isn't really about what they did. It's about what I chose to become after they showed me who they were. Verity Quantum IPO'd last Tuesday. The news broke fast, faster than we planned. Some say it was a leak. I don't think so. I think someone inside the family, maybe Elise, maybe even Mason, knew what was coming and wanted to soften the blow. 1 billion went public. 8.4 billion in valuation. By end of day, my personal equity shot into the 11-figure range. Overnight, the media called me the Ghost Titan, a man who built his empire in silence, then let it crash down in a single withdrawal slip. One interview request came in from a financial journalist I actually respected, said he'd been following Verity's moves for over a year and suspected something big was coming. I declined. Politely. There's no need to explain when the proof is printed in tickers and trending headlines. Rowan stepped down from Whitlock Interiors. For personal reflection, the press release said, no mention of the ownership shift. No mention of the letter or the prenup. Just that she needed space. The board, now mine, quietly accepted her resignation within 48 hours. Her 40% stake was absorbed by Miles' equity. I never stepped foot inside the company. I didn't need to. I had people for that. Bryn deleted her Instagram. That was the first thing I heard about her. The profile that once bragged about luxury retreats, tagged brands no one could pronounce, and threw backhanded compliments like grenades, gone. Word has it she started therapy. Not out of grief. Out of fear. A fear born from realizing she had stood center stage at the humiliation of the decade, mocking a man who owned more than her entire social circle combined. I got a call from her husband, Mason. He sounded tired. Said he was sorry. Said he never meant for it to go that far. I didn't respond. Let him sit with the echo of silence. You see, apologies mean little when they follow exposure. True remorse comes with change, not panic. And that family, they were addicted to image. They'd kneel in private, but only when the cameras turned off. That was always the issue. They loved the version of me that didn't need acknowledgement, but hated the day I stopped tolerating invisibility. Now, when they speak of me, it's in hushed tones. Cash and Miles. The man who walked out of a family dinner and into Forbes. The man who stood in a bank lobby and watched a room collapse without raising his voice. The man who didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't plead, but left a box, a letter, and $1 billion paper trail in his wake. I sometimes think about that exact moment. When the whisper changed. It wasn't immediate. It didn't happen in the bank. It happened 2 days later when someone from Rowan's extended family, an aunt I'd only met once, called me, her voice trembling with something between awe and regret. I never knew, Keshin, she said. I always thought you were. Just quiet. I told her I was. Quiet doesn't mean small. It means focused. That's the part they never understood. They wanted fireworks. I built architecture. And now I live in a world they can't afford to enter. I didn't move far from the penthouse. My new place sits high above the skyline, but not in the flashy part of town. No gold elevators. No doorman trained to memorize your dog's name. Just a code. A key. A view. Peace. I designed it myself. Every corner, every line. It's minimal. Intentional. A place built not to impress, but to breathe in. The first week, I heard from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old classmates. Former colleagues. Distant cousins who suddenly remembered birthdays and shared memories I don't recall having. They came with admiration disguised as friendship. Invitations wrapped in praise. I declined most of them, because I don't live there anymore, in the world where being seen is confused with being understood. I live in the after, the place you reach when you stop explaining your worth, when you stop justifying your place at the table, and instead, build your own table. Different wood, different height, different rules. There's a painting in my new office. A commission from an artist I found in Lisbon. It's abstract, shades of black and gold, a fracture splitting the center. I never explained to him what I wanted. I just sent him a line from the letter I left Rowan. I didn't leave because of the insults. I left because you believed them. He captured it in color. Sometimes I look at that painting and think of all the rooms I sat in, smiling politely while being quietly erased. Rooms where I was tolerated, not welcomed. Rooms where they thought power was volume and presence was posture. I didn't belong in those rooms. I outgrew them. Not in bitterness. In clarity. Because there's a moment, if you're lucky, when you realize the difference between being included and being valued. They included me. They never valued me. So I left. And now? Now they whisper. At fundraisers, they say I might back a new foundation. At board meetings, they mention my name in hypothetical acquisitions. Even the Whitlocks, for all their pride, now tread carefully around any conversation that begins with cashin. They still don't know how much I own. They think the billion was the punchline, but it wasn't. It was the prelude. Because what I built wasn't just wealth. It was autonomy. And autonomy? That's the final freedom. No approval needed. No explanations given. Just presence. And presence, when it comes from a man who once stood in your shadows and now towers above your skyline, is unforgettable. They whisper because they don't dare speak my name too loudly. Because they know what happens when silence stands up and says, without flinching, I was never begging. I was building. By the second year, sovereign funds came sniffing. Not hedge funds. Not retail traders. The big ones. Countries. Hidden wealth buckets with names no one ever says on television. They didn't want us to go public. They didn't want us loud. They wanted us theirs. So we stayed private. Discreet. Expensive. Rowan had no idea. She'd ask, occasionally, over dinner or while brushing her teeth, how's your project going? I'd say steady. She never pressed. Her world didn't require depth. It required decorum. And Bryn? She just assumed I'd failed. Cashin's probably still designing logos for wellness bloggers, she once said at a family brunch, loud enough for everyone to hear. I didn't respond. Just sipped my coffee and let them believe I was broke and irrelevant. What they never understood was that I preferred it that way. Every time they dismissed me, every joke, every pitying glance, those were deposits. Not into my wallet, but into my resolve. They kept showing their hand, bluffing superiority, while I stacked quiet wins behind the curtain. Year 3, Verity Quantum was valued at $2.3 billion. We split control 3 ways, but I retained the master node for domestic holdings. Everything flowed through Miles Equity, a quiet Delaware LLC with offshore backups and fully private custodial accounts. The infrastructure was tight, airtight, because I knew one day I'd need to reveal it. Not in pieces. All at once. I bought commercial real estate under pseudonyms. Warehouses in Atlanta, office parks in Dallas, server farms in Utah. I never splurged. Never upgraded my car. Never posted photos. I let them think I was stuck, that I was dependent. In reality, I was patient. The more they pushed me to the side, the more room I had to expand. While they sipped champagne at garden parties, I closed a deal with the Finnish tech consortium. While they mocked crypto over mimosas, I cashed out of Ethereum just before the 4th correction and doubled back into biotech futures the moment the FDA delays lifted. I didn't need applause. I needed leverage. Rowan's mother once looked me straight in the eye and said, Cashin, you're very polite. A good support system for Rowan. Some men aren't meant to lead, and that's okay. I nodded at her, smiled politely, and thought about how she was drinking wine paid for by a dividend I'd issued from a fund she didn't know existed. A fund that owned the land her interior design warehouse was built on. I wasn't offended. I was amused. By year 5, I was done hiding. Not out of ego. Out of necessity. Some things had shifted behind the scenes. Bryn was becoming louder. Meaner. I noticed Rowan started laughing at the jokes instead of defending me. And one night, at a formal dinner, I saw the look. That subtle glance between Bryn and Rowan that said, he's a burden. That was when I knew it was time. The bank visit wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. It was choreography. I chose that branch because it was their branch. Their territory. Bryn always mentioned the class of bank sphere on 5th and Knox. That's why I went there. I knew she'd be there eventually. I just didn't expect her to be there that exact day. But fate? Fate loves irony. I didn't just walk into that bank with numbers. I walked in with history. With proof. With weight. The billion wasn't a show-off. It was to punctuate. To end a long, quiet sentence I had written over years of being underestimated. So when the banker's hands trembled, when Bryn's face fell, when Rowan's absence became a glaring echo in the background of it all, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt awake. They had built their world on noise. I had built mine in silence. And now it was louder than anything they'd ever spoken. The printer spat out the slip slowly, each mechanical click echoing louder than it should have. The room, already tense, dropped into a kind of hollow stillness. You could hear every footstep on the polished marble, every breath behind me. The banker's hands, still trembling despite her professional mask, lifted the slip as if it were something sacred. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She just slid it across the glass in front of me and stepped back like I might explode. I picked it up. The paper was warm, thin, and humming with weight beyond its physical form. I didn't need to read it. I knew what it said. Still, I let my eyes trail over the words, each one perfectly aligned, bold, and irrefutable. Withdrawal request authorized. $1 billion. Account. Cash and Miles, founder, Verity Quantum Holdings. Cleared balance remaining. $87,324,098.42. The teller's lips parted slightly, like she wanted to ask something but thought better of it. Her eyes shifted from the slip to my face and back again, unsure how to look at me now. And that was when I knew the shift had fully arrived. I signed it. Clean. Sharp strokes. I didn't hesitate or draw it out. Then I slid the slip back across the counter with a small nod. Thank you, I said. Simple. Direct. Then I turned. I didn't need to say anything to Bryn. Not yet. She was already unraveling. She stood frozen near the lounge area, her oversized sunglasses no longer resting coolly on her nose, but dangling from her hand like a lifeline she forgot to let go of. The girl next to her, Kelsey, I think, the one who always posted about her quiet luxury lifestyle, had her mouth open like she was watching a car crash in slow motion. No one said anything. Even the guard by the door had taken a step closer, not out of concern, but curiosity. It wasn't just the number. It was the realization. All this time, they thought I was borrowing space in their world. That I married in to secure a seat at a table I never deserved. That I kept quiet because I was ashamed. But what they didn't understand, what they never even considered, was that silence, when intentional, is not submission. It's strategy. I turned to face Bryn fully now. Not rushed, not dramatic, just present. She looked at me like I'd peeled off a mask she didn't know was even there. Her lips parted, then closed again. There was no script for this moment. No witty insult, no polished condescension ready on her tongue. That's when it happened. Her knees gave out. She staggered slightly before her legs folded beneath her, and she dropped to the pristine marble floor, hands catching her just before her designer bag spilled. Her heels clattered. Her pride shattered. The gasp came from someone behind her, maybe one of the bank staff, or her own friend. A man rushed forward to help, but she waved him off and stayed down, panting softly like she'd just run up 10 flights of stairs. She wasn't crying. Not yet. But the look in her eyes, that vacant, stunned helplessness, said it all. It wasn't fear that dropped her. It was realization. Realization that the stories she'd told herself, and others, about me no longer held power. That the image of the broke, forgettable brother-in-law had died on the lobby floor, and in its place stood someone she never imagined she'd have to answer to. I didn't move. I didn't gloat. I just looked at her, the way she'd looked at me for years, like I was something to be studied and dismissed. But now the roles had reversed. Now she was the subject under glass, unraveling in public. I hope you remember this feeling, I said quietly. That was all. Not a threat. Not revenge. Just truth. I turned back toward the exit, the slip of paper still warm in my pocket, the moment still crackling in the air behind me. As I passed the security guard, he gave a small nod. No words, just the kind of gesture men make when they've seen something worth remembering. I returned the nod, then stepped out into the sunlight. Outside, the city looked the same. Cars passing, phones buzzing, pigeons darting between crumbs. But something inside me had shifted. Not because of the money. The money had always been there. But because the mask they tried to force on me had finally cracked apart in public. They'd always wanted me to perform, smile wider, dress louder, laugh at the right cues. I did none of that. I stood still, and the room froze. Inside that bank, I became something they couldn't laugh at, couldn't dismiss, couldn't reduce. Not because I raised my voice, but because I didn't have to. The paper had done the talking. The numbers had testified. And Bryn, loud, cruel Bryn, had buckled without me laying a finger. I got into my car and sat in silence. I didn't check my phone. I didn't open the banking app. I just stared at the slip again. $1 billion. But it wasn't the money that satisfied me. It was the shift. The sudden, undeniable pivot in their world where Cashin wasn't a name to smirk at anymore. It was a name to remember. A name to whisper. They tried to cut me out like I was a stray thread on their perfect little tapestry. Like I was never meant to be woven into their legacy. But here's the thing about families like Rowan's. They're excellent at curating appearances and terrible at understanding what actually holds their world together. That night, my phone lit up with missed calls, Rowan's number first. Then her mother's. Then Mason, Bryn's husband, the one who once gave me a smug handshake at his New Year's party and told me, just keep treating Rowan right, man. You're lucky to have her. I didn't answer any of them. I let them ring and ring until my screen dimmed and the buzz stopped completely. I didn't need to hear excuses or rushed apologies. Not after years of being their invisible wallflower. Because the truth is, while they were busy making me feel like a guest in my own marriage, I had already become the structure that propped up their lifestyle. And the irony? They didn't even know it. They thought I was disposable. A name left off group chats. A seat never saved at the table. Bryn once told Rowan during a wine-fueled brunch, loud enough for me to hear, that I looked like someone who'd be grateful for a coupon code. I remembered that because of how hard they all laughed. And because Rowan didn't defend me. She looked at me and smiled like I'd understand. Like I get the joke. It wasn't a joke. It was a forecast. They never invited me to family board meetings, even though I held a 17% silent equity stake in the real estate fund the Whitlocks used to finance their vacation properties. They never consulted me when rebranding Whitlock Interiors, even though I was the one who paid the design firm that saved their campaign from complete irrelevance. And when Rowan's mother had her gallbladder surgery and the private insurance lapsed, guess whose emergency wire transfer covered the out-of-pocket expense? They had no idea, because I never told them. They called me silent, passive, forgettable. But what they didn't realize was that while they cut ribbons at galas, I held the deeds to the land beneath the venues. I had power of attorney over Rowan's trust, not because she trusted me blindly, but because I was the only one who actually read the fine print when her father passed. I was the one who reorganized their tax structures after their CPA died unexpectedly. I didn't announce it. I didn't ask for praise. I just fixed what would have broken them. And they rewarded me with condescension. Rowan once said she admired how I didn't need attention to feel important. That was when we were still in sync, before the glitter of her old world called her back like a drug. Before Bryn's influence wormed its way into her spine and straightened it just enough to face away from me. One day, I looked at her across the kitchen island, and she seemed further away than she'd ever been, even though we were in the same room. The last time I was invited to a Whitlock family event was 6 months before the bank incident. Some cousin's engagement party. I wasn't on the seating chart. They put me at the overflow table with the distant relatives and interns. Rowan said it was a mix-up, that she'd talk to the planner. But she never did. She went off with her champagne and her socialite laughter, and I sat with a man who was live-streaming the event to his dog's Instagram page. That night, I decided I was done asking for space in their world. I would build my own. And the moment in the bank? That was the line in the sand. After the withdrawal, after the silence and the collapse, I knew the calls would come. The questions. The rewrites of memory. Suddenly, they'd want to reconnect. Suddenly, I wouldn't be the outsider. I'd be a mystery, an interesting enigma, a visionary. That's how people like them operate. If they can't erase you, they rewrite you. But I had something better than revenge. I had leverage. They tried to cut me from the family, but they forgot one thing: families that are built like corporations don't run on sentiment. They run on structure. And I was the structure. The quiet column they thought was decoration, until the ceiling started to crack. So I didn't call them back. Instead, I went home. And I opened the folder labeled Whitlock Framework, the one I kept on a hard drive encrypted with a passphrase even I sometimes forgot. Inside were spreadsheets, contracts, authorizations, and signed memorandums. Financial records. Emergency loan approvals. Investment trails. My signature, theirs, and a paper trail so long it could wrap around their gated estate twice. That's when I realized. They never cut me out. They only tried to. They forgot I was the one holding the scissors. Receipts. Records. Redirections. I had it all. They didn't remember the fine print because people like them never bother with it. They assume things will run smoothly because they always have, because someone else always makes sure of it. That someone had been me. For 5 years, I'd signed the papers, drafted the templates, authorized the extensions, and shifted their liabilities into my arms like I was collecting antique porcelain. Quiet, careful, intentional. So when I sat down in my home office that night, the city glowing dimly beyond the glass wall, I opened the digital vault and stared at the empire they never knew was built partially on my back. Dozens of documents, PDFs, scans, notarized contracts, bank statements, all bearing one common detail: my name. Miles Equity Trust wasn't just a shell. It was a skeleton key. I'd funneled Rowan's dormant trust portfolio through it to protect it from market fluctuations. Bryn's husband, Mason, had once begged for a liquidity infusion when one of his boutique hotels was on the verge of foreclosure. I arranged it. Quietly. An unsecured loan, backed by property I now owned on paper. He'd never read the fine print. He just smiled when the money hit and called me a good guy. A good guy. That was the story they told themselves. That Cashin was reliable, harmless, maybe even desperate for approval. They didn't know I had every favor cataloged, timestamped, signed. I didn't get angry. I didn't fume. I worked. I filed a single Form 966, through the appropriate tax channels to dissolve the umbrella entity that tied my financial holdings to any and all Whitlock family properties. Quiet severance. Then, one by one, I pulled the pins. The joint brokerage account I had with Rowan? Emptied. My half moved into Miles' equity secured wealth fund. The title transfer I co-signed on the Whitlock Lakeview estate? Rescinded with cause, my name wiped, and a lien placed instead under a holding company I controlled. The only thing left in my shared name with Rowan was a 3% ownership stake in Whitlock Interiors, and I was coming for that too. Just not yet. I composed an email. No subject line. No message body. Just a single attachment, a compressed folder named Structure. It contained every document that mattered. Every transfer, every wire, every signature they'd conveniently forgotten or underestimated. I didn't send it to Rowan or Bryn. I sent it to their assistant, Elise, the one who had always treated me kindly, who always whispered, "I hope you're okay," when no one else noticed I was being left behind. I knew Elise would open it. I knew she'd read every word. And more importantly, I knew she'd pass it on. Sometimes the cleanest retribution isn't public. It's quiet. It's private. It's sitting in a marble kitchen at 9:13 a.m. with your coffee going cold while a PDF opens and you realize the man you mocked, ignored, and erased was the same man who paid your mortgage, who saved your business, who made sure your name didn't end up in bankruptcy filings or debt collection reports. That's what I wanted. Not screaming. Not tears. Realization. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair. For the first time in months, maybe years, my shoulders didn't feel weighed down. There was something about truth, when handled with patience and precision, that settled into the room like clean oxygen. And that truth was simple. I didn't need them. They needed me. They always had. Rowan's mother had once hosted a brunch where she introduced me to her friend as Cashin, Rowan's support system. Like I was some ergonomic office chair. That same friend had later needed a bridge loan when her international art shipment got frozen due to tax disputes. Guess who unfroze it? Me. Guess who had her name on a payment agreement now earning interest? Also me. I hadn't done these things to collect power. I'd done them to hold everything together. To keep the family afloat when their name was heavy but their decisions were shallow. But they never saw it. They thought the walls held themselves up. So I sent the paper trail not to gloat, but to let them feel the architecture shift. To let them sit in a house they didn't know had started cracking from the moment I decided to leave. The messages started rolling in 2 hours later. Elise, is this real? Mason, Cass, call me bro. This. I didn't know. Rowan's mother. What do you want? Please tell me before this becomes irreparable. And finally, Rowan, you did all this behind my back? That one made me pause. Because no, I hadn't done it behind her back. I had done it with her signature. Her approval. Her trust. She just never cared enough to look at the documents she signed. She never asked what asset consolidation meant. Never inquired why her name appeared next to mine on LLC filings. She was always too busy being seen. But me? I was busy seeing. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I opened the last file in the vault. The trust restructure. Rowan had once insisted on signing over a percentage of her ownership in Whitlock Interiors to our shared wealth plan, as she called it, during a brief financial scare. I'd taken care of everything legally, cleanly. She never asked to see the documents again. That 3% stake? I now own 40%. All legal. All signed. All filed. She hadn't read it. Because the family she came from never read the fine print. And I never forgot it. The venue was beautiful, I'll give them that. Gold-etched menus, chandeliers like dripping crystal, and a floral arrangement that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Rowan's mother always had taste, if not tact. It was her birthday, after all. 65, according to the invitation I never received. Not that they forgot me. No, this was deliberate. Planned. Curated. They didn't think I'd show. But I paid for it. Literally. The Whitlocks had always used one account for their event expenses. It was convenient, Rowan once told me. Consolidated. Efficient. She never asked where the replenishments came from. She just assumed.